Okay, hi everyone. We are looking at incremental language development for Wolfram language. We have a variety of topics today, as always. So first up, improved date string parsing and formatting. Main ideas.
Right.
More freedoms. That sounds deeply political. No. Go ahead.
Okay, Nick, do you want to explain or should I?
Yeah. So basically, in addition to work on making sure that date string parsing is faster and supports more formats, we also want to take advantage of the fact that we have some tools that can support dates in different languages with different writing scripts. And so right now we have this existing option for date object and date object like containers that basically says this is the way the date should show up. It basically mimics the formats we allow in date string. We have a futurized ref page called date format new that kind of has our proposal of how we would take the additional flexibility of saying, in addition to these elements, I want to say these elements are in Spanish, or I
Okay,
want
is
them
there
to.
a language option or something, or what?
Yeah. So rather than necessarily having a language option, we're trying to basically flesh out. There's a language parameter basically, and then because particularly with dates, but with languages in general, we run into complicated cases like Serbian, where it's common to write it either in Latin characters or Cyrillic characters, or a lot of Indian languages have multiple writing scripts, trying to sort of give a comprehensive way to spec out a date format and say, these are the elements I want included. This is the language I want them in. This is the writing script if we need them.
Oh yeah, this should be an association. This shouldn't be a random list with extra little pieces here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think this should be an association, and we should have sort of a list of bank names for those that are common association settings, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
that correspond to, U.S. standard dates, European standard dates, whatever it is, and then, but let me understand. Why does it say the date formatting of dates? Why didn't it just say the formatting of dates?
Yeah, it should be the formatting of dates.
Okay. But
So I think the point here is that we are using this powerful library called ICU, and they handle things via locales. So we are interpolating their locales to what we had before in data string, this elements language.
yeah, I understand.
So now we cover both things.
Okay, but I mean, we have a locales issue that is also an issue for our language system because, language English, locale, whatever. I mean, we have this mechanism, and it's been a mechanism that has been supposed to be installed in the front end for the spell checker for things like British spell checking and so on.
Right.
So that's the discussion further down of
Okay.
local data and how to use locales in more general.
Right. So, I mean, if your question is, could date format have an association with a bunch of details about language and script and all this kind of thing, and delimiters and all that? The answer is for sure.
Right. Yeah. So that's our proposal to support what ICU does by extending our language to cover locales. And
Fine, but let's look at locales in more general LT. Okay, so you're talking about this
right.
from date string.
Yes.
Okay, let me make a comment about this. Okay, one of the things that I'm not exactly thrilled about is in date list plot or in time series that, if you look under the hood, the ultimate coordinates that are being used, and this probably relates to the whole datum issue and so on, datums for dates issue and so on, is in the end, the coordinate system is absolute time, which is a really cruddy and an unfriendly coordinate system. But in the end, like for example, if I want to place something in an epilogue of a date list plot, in the end, I'm going to have to use absolute time coordinates for the x-axis. What should we be doing about that?
Right. So there are two things there. One, it is done for efficiency because
I
being
understand.
numbers. Yeah. And the second thing is that the internally the plotting functionality cannot understand dates in general. But I think this is going to be changed via the scaling functions mechanism.
Okay, well, that'd be nice. But the alternative would be that there's a sort of datum for the plot that allows you to be able to give, and I don't know exactly how this should be thought about, but it allows you, and perhaps that's a scaling function issue, to say these numbers that are just in fractional days or something, or whatever it is, they are going to be, yes, I'm going to use numbers because it's a plot, and I can do things like, like for example, if I get an interpolating function, I think it's, interpolating functions in the case where we might have a leap year or some weird or leap second, that's just a horrible mess. And I think by the time, we've got to ultimately turn the time axis into numbers, right? So, but my point is that maybe we can have the option of turning them into a more civilized kind of number than just the absolute time numbers.
Yes. So in my opinion, something that works via scaling functions such that you can specify independently in both axes that you want dates there. For example, the date plotting functions do not support dates in the y-axis.
No, they don't. Right.
And that
would be
appears
good
sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Well, okay, so you think there's a separate solution for taking this? I see. The scaling function is basically something which already does the two-way transformation between dates to coordinates and back again to dates for labeling.
Exactly. So currently it can do any transformation, any function. So the idea is to generalize.
But it has to have an inverse function, doesn't it?
You can specify, I think, both direct and inverse.
Yeah, okay.
So in this case, you would have to specify independently per axis that you want dates. And then something worries about any date in any form.
Well, I think it's a good solution.
I mean, it would work with quantities too.
Right, but I would like to point out that I don't know how scaling functions plays with epilogue, for example.
That I don't know. That's a question for Brett.
Yeah, but we should have that question answered.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so from date string. Okay, so wait a minute. So from date string is a new thing?
Yes. So part of the motivation is right now, anything that accepts dates will, as input anywhere, will accept date strings, and also this form that is a list of a date string and then a list of elements that basically correspond to a date format. And there are some complicated things that go with how date strings are parsed as input. And right now, there's no real landing page to put those on. We either document them on the 40 pages that have dates or 40 ref pages that potentially have dates as inputs and say in every case, this is how, these are automatic delimiters that'll be interpreted. This
so wait a minute. Right now, if I say date object of a string,
yep,
it will do the conversion, right?
Right, exactly. This is basically a special, there's no change in functionality here versus date object of a string, but it gives us the ability to document more thoroughly, specifically when you're working with strings as input, this is how you can handle different formats. This is the different elements that are important. We can
not totally thrilled by this. I mean, I'm not totally thrilled.
In my opinion, this follows from absolute time, which is a more readable way of understanding what's going on than just forcing everything through the date object.
Sorry, say that again.
So we have already from absolute time, which is a function dedicated to convert absolute times into.
Even though that would work if you said date object of an absolute time.
Exactly. Right. Yes, but it's a more readable way.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
So this fills that gap.
Okay. Okay. Sandra is asking, is there a way to get 3rd, 21st, 17th of a month? I think so. Unless I'm very confused, that's a straightforward thing to get, isn't it? I mean, given a month, right? If I say, okay, so that's maybe I'm not understanding, or maybe there's something I'm missing here. If I say January 2021. Why did that turn into a date object like that? Why didn't it? Is that what we want it to do? I guess we do. Okay. How do we get the 3rd of this month? How do I get from this? How do I get the 3rd day of that month?
Adding 2 days.
No, but that's not the 1st of the month. That's the whole month.
Yes, but the operations. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes.
But that's actually turns out not to be the question that Sander was asking. But we'll get to his question in a minute. But I want to ask my question too. My question here is, how do I get the 3rd day of that month?
Right. So, perhaps Nick has a better way. What I would do is to project these to a day, and then add 2 days.
So that's first date or something of this. Is that right? Is that what?
No, it would be just changing the granularity to day. So it would be date object of date. So that would produce the first date.
Yeah.
And then add 2 days. Quantity 2 days. Right.
Okay. All right. Let's address Sander's question. Writing January 3rd. Do we have a way to do that? Preferably with it. What's that?
Without specifying a year.
I guess so.
Yeah. So that is more or less what the date pattern or date select criteria are. We can basically say that the month is January and the day is the 3rd, but we don't have a notion of effectively a headless date, if that's the question.
Well, I mean, can we get this? Is there some way to get that format out?
I see. So we basically want an ordinal day of month.
Yes. That's just something we should have. We don't have it right now.
Yeah, we don't have it right now, but there's no reason we couldn't have. I mean, we already have flexibility to generate ordinal dates from integer string, etc. So we could have.
Yeah, seems like that's just a missing thing. Now,
but that wouldn't be a string.
I know, so I was about to address that. So the question is, can it do a superscript? And the answer is, I think it's good enough to do not a superscript. To do a superscript is more luxury. I think we shouldn't bother. Am I making sense?
Yeah. We could potentially, yeah.
I mean, maybe we could have a future thing. Is there any place to put a non-string output for a date format?
Not in a date format. We could have it from date value.
Actually, there may be a Unicode character that is that superscript. That's another possibility, which we should check out. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know offhand, but can certainly look into that.
Yeah, I bet there is.
Yeah, we could just call that the ordinal day or something. Because day.
Well, ordinal day would be ordinal day string and then some kind of ordinal day, I don't know, Unicode or something, but perhaps that's too obscure. Mm-hmm. Right? If there's I bet there is a Unicode character for that.
Yeah, there's a probably not in this meeting, but in a future one, we'll look at a handful of new date string elements that we want to add in just from various things that we found that aren't covered currently in our date string elements framework, but they're largely peripheral things like this that may be useful, but are not.
Yeah, okay, fine. All right. Okay, so then show granularity, whether. So this has got to be an association. We can't have random string options flapping around unless I think this is a very detailed thing that we should essentially be bank switching by a named, category. Now, essentially, what you're talking about here is like date themes.
Yeah, so what we've sort of thought of is that there are named date formats or date standards. So ISO 8601 is a big one that specs out what the elements are, what the delimiters are, and it doesn't spell out any names of months or days, so there's no language associated with it. But locales are something where when I say I want a date using British English, it will say, okay, the elements should be in this order, they typically have this delimiter, it uses
Right.
the
So
collective
what you're
structure.
saying is there are string named themes,
Mhm.
and then there is an association which gives all the details.
Right. And we can basically map any named theme to an association. And then if we
That's fine.
I think you certainly convinced me. It probably makes sense to just have an association for these things.
Yeah, it's too much of a mess. Now,
Right, but these themes might depend on the locale. That's something nice about them.
well, hold on a second. This particular case, element,
Mhm.
that's something that, and by the way, the fact that you've got this horrible ambiguity with double bracing those things is just horrifying, because in fact it's ambiguous because we've already got the list case where it isn't double braced, right?
Right.
So we can't really do that. So I think, I mean, the fact is there's an additional thing here, which is some of these are keywords like hour, minute, etc., and
Mhm.
some are not.
Right. Which is something we've kind of run into in the past with, if you say date string and you list what elements you want, if it's a keyword, we use it. If it's anything else, it just gets literally inserted, which is why you can have arbitrary delimiters.
Yeah, sure, but which is nice. But I mean, perhaps this is more like a string template where
Mhm.
we might even have some. Or what's a good example where we have a limited set? I mean, string template will be one thing. I mean, this is really a date template more than it is. I mean, that particular thing is a date template, and in the association, it could be named as a date template, and possibly it could be given in some kind of more string template type form. But this is kind of this is the cheap version of how to do that, right? Just as another cheap version would be quotes, British date or something.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so the next subsection in the agenda will show that British date can be a little complicated just because, so this is the ICU's curated list of formats for each locale.
Okay.
And so, for a British date, there's a standard that they use for a short one, a medium one, a long one, and a full one. Full will typically include day of the week, but it is locale dependent because some locales don't include that or may include.
All right. So look, I don't know. The Belize long is a
Mhm.
little bit weird, but I don't think it's necessarily terrible. If what you want, so let's take this for example,
Mhm.
or let's take what's a good example? Sweden here. Okay,
Mhm.
great, but it sure isn't called Wednesday in Swedish.
It is if you're using, so this is specifically, these are just variations for English in different countries. So there are a number of potential languages that get used in Sweden. This is basically the standard form for writing dates in Sweden using English.
Okay, but then look, if we say date format arrow Swedish or something, or Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously we should use entities, right? Date format arrow. I see, that's not going to work. Well, I mean, we could also use these locale names.
So the problem here is that, right, the problem is that you first choose the language and then you choose in which country you are speaking that language. So that means this is
Well, okay,
English
but the
in
locale
Swedish.
name en_se, we could support that as a string name.
Yeah, and I think if we're supporting locales, it makes sense to support that. There are a handful of standard locale notations that are defined by ISO
Right.
standards.
So in the end, there should be a locale entity
Mm-hmm.
type.
Yeah,
and then
that's the last bullet point in this subsection is the current version of locales and entity.
well, do we really have them? I mean,
they're not exposed, so they're still under development.
They are in dev mode.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, this is something we developed a long time ago, that when we were talking about supporting different dictionaries in the front end, but it never went out because we never supported that properly.
Well, that's something we're working on. I think the Pitcairn one is really exotic. How many people live in Pitcairn? I don't know.
No, that's funny because
That
this
must be
means
fun
that
if they're like 20
what we
people
included
and
in
you
this
get to have
list.
your own locale. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. So we got this list from the CLDR data. So that is
Yes.
used by ICU, and it means that they have different preferences in these locales. So there is some different preference in Pitcairn English than in English from Puerto Rico, for example. So that's why they have listed that.
No, I understand. I understand completely. But I mean,
so we included. Yep.
So the basic point is, the correct way to do this is using these locales to say date format arrow locale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
well, you sorry, I think you should say which date you want. So if it's long form, full form, etc., and using this local.
Yeah,
So the
well,
important thing is the format.
So one of the things is in locale data, which we have a ref page for, we've tried to basically say if we have these locales, you could potentially look up the various formats to get the populated association we're talking about having in date format. And we may have some convenience feature that says, I want my date format to be Japanese. And by default, it says, okay, a Japanese date is the long form. And so it populates like this.
Hold on. What I'm imagining is that there is an option, just like there's a language option, there would also be a language locale option. Well, let me think about this for a second. Hold on. Let me think about this. Or should we have language be something? Are all these really language locales, or are they something else? I mean, is this ultimately a language locale story? Liberian English, for example. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, so because could we just make it that the way you get this is, date format arrow long or something, language arrow English Liberia. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that rather than having a language locale or a locale option, it potentially makes sense to just have the language option accept locales.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If they're presented as English Seychelles, it's perfectly reasonable that that's a language, but it's a variant.
Right. And locales have to have a language because that's the minimal set that defines a locale.
Okay, so English here, is that a locale or is that
that is
language?
So that is a locale that is just defined there. For each language, there's effectively a generic locale that doesn't have a country associated with it. It will basically, they're typically based on the CLDR data is a reference country that says, okay, for English, we use basically the UK standard for all of these things.
I bet it isn't. I bet it's the US standard.
It's probably the US, yeah. But
right.
For Serbian, we can basically say
actually for English in particular, that's a special case because and for Spanish because they have a list of countries that should default to British English and countries that should default to US English, for example.
I'm sorry, who has what are you saying? So you're saying okay, look.
In ICU they have a list of countries that use that should default to US English or should default to British English in case they don't define a basic.
So one possibility then
because this works like, for example.
I understand. So one possibility is that we could say language arrow and then a country entity, and in some cases it'll be completely obvious what that means. Right. In other cases it may be ambiguous. In other words, for a given country there will be an official language, but there might be 7 official languages.
Yeah, if you say language goes to India, it's going to be complicated.
I thought it was Hindi. Maybe it's English. I don't know. What
10 official languages I think they have, but yeah.
Oh, is that right? Okay, well, fine. But I mean, then we need a notation that could be a list, language arrow, a list of the country and its and and the language we're talking about, and that will be an alternative to giving the the locale form, the specific locale entity.
Mhm. Yeah. So the main concern I have with having it be specifically a separate option is that with dates in particular, we have to worry about the language both in input and output potentially. So if I say this date object's language is Spanish, we may run into questions about an input date going into that. Do we default it to Spanish, or do we have a notation that says this input dates format is a short date in English, but I want the output to be a long date in Spanish?
Well, I
And
don't quite understand. I mean, what determines? Okay, what ingests a date as input? Date from date string would ingest a date as input, right?
yes,
Okay.
date object is always the most complicated case because it ingests dates as input potentially, and it generates them as output.
Well,
And
maybe we should go to using from date string as the ingester, and have from date string have a second argument or something, which is have that be the main place where we have control over the input, and have date object be something that is primarily controlling the output. Because otherwise we've got to have input date format, output date format options for date object, right?
Right. This is sort of the complication we ran into with time zones, where, traditionally a time zone option specifies the output time zone, and your input time zone is your dollar time zone. But for date object, we have to potentially handle objects that come in with their own time zone. And
Yes.
so
Time zone in the string, or time zone. Yeah, I mean, it's not only time zone in the string, but also you need to be able to quote it as I mean this time zone.
Right.
How do you do that?
So a date object, there's basically a hierarchy within date object of a date object can take another date object as an input. And in that case, that already has a time zone associated with it and will carry it along unless you specify a different one. If you give an input that has no time zone, it's just a date list or an absolute time or a date string that has no time zone, then we fall back to dollar time zone. And if it's something else, if I specify an explicit time zone,
Yeah, I understand.
then we have to kind of handle one way or the other. So I think,
well, how do we handle it? Is it an input time zone or an output time zone?
So if the time zone option to date object specifies the output time zone of the date object, and will also be used as the input time zone if there's no other time zone specified. So if I say date object and provide a date list and say time zone goes to 0, it will say, okay, this date was given in GMT and the output should also be GMT.
But if the date string contained a time zone, EST or something.
Yep. Then it would, if you didn't specify an output time zone, it would inherit and keep that time zone. If you did specify one, it would say this time zone is in the time zone that the string specifies and should be converted to the time zone you say it should be.
Yeah.
The same way, if you said date object of now and time zone goes to 12, it would take the current time and convert it to the target time zone.
Something important here is that until now we were not able to extract time zones from strings. So this situation is new.
Yeah, this is one of the new things that the improved date string parsing supports.
Okay, so look, from date string looks like it's got to exist, because it's really the thing that goes, that unravels what you meant by that date string. So for example, if you say from date string, time zone arrow blah, I'm assuming that will assume, unless there is a time zone contained in the date string, that will mean assume this date string referred to this time zone.
Right.
Now,
and generate a data object with that time zone as output.
Yeah, and if you want a different time zone, then you say date object of that thing, comma, time zone arrow, whatever, and that then generates a
time
in other
zone
words,
convert either way. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Okay. But so let's go back around this. All right. So what we've got here is we're breaking this into short, medium, long, full as string names, which would default to the current dollar language or dollar language. I mean, we probably should have two dollar symbols, dollar language and dollar language locale, I would think, because they'll be used by different functions, right?
Right. Yeah, we've tried to sort of inventory.
But,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, for example, we already have a function that it's getting the language and the country, which is integer name.
Yeah, we have the
We
ability
try
to
to have this
populate
locale
a
because we didn't have-
locale from the operating system.
Right, that's a good model for this. But does that get locale or not?
Not yet.
No, because we
don't
didn't have any.
This should explain what language can actually be here. This documentation needs to be filled out.
No,
Do you understand? That
right,
documentation.
language can only be language. Yes, I see. Yes, I see.
I mean, I think in general, the language option should probably work with locales. Up until
This
now,
is
we haven't
pathetic.
had
This needs to properly document this. This is kind of annoying that this is wrongly done. Come on, this needs a table that says what kinds of things can happen there.
Mhm.
Okay, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, up until now, there hasn't been a proper representation of language locales. Again, this entity type is currently in dev mode. I think
Yeah,
it
but
makes
needs
sense.
to get out of there.
Yeah, it needs to be fleshed out, and anything that accepts language as an option should take language locale, because minimally it can just extract the language from it. There are some complicated cases that currently use language where they also potentially need to support writing scripts. So transliterate's a function that takes languages and interprets them, but really operates on writing scripts. So when you say transliterate this from English to Japanese,
So wait a minute, the language locale contains the writing script or not?
it can contain it. So each of the languages have
Yes,
default
potentially,
writing
yes.
scripts, and then in cases where it's ambiguous, it will note both of them. So Serbian's a case where
Bosnian is more exotic, right? It has 3.
Mhm.
I remember the one my few hours that I spent in Bosnia once. The road signs were nice and exotic.
Mm.
Right. So wait a minute. So how do you specify that? Are there 3 locales for corresponding to Bosnia for Roman Cyrillic Arabic?
Yeah, there may be even more. I'm not sure offhand.
Okay, we'll find it. Okay, but
Yes,
those are
in
separate
a few
locales.
languages we have many locales.
Okay, fine.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think like India has 20
Yes,
official
Uzbek is another
locales.
case. Yes.
Okay, so then let's just understand this. Are these all being put as potential settings for dollar language? Could be a locale entity that is a subdivision of those things, where language arrow whatever could be treated, where we will have a translator that goes from a language locale down to a language for functions that only accept language and don't accept language locale.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't
All right,
think
so
there's
then we
any
don't
issue.
have to have a dollar language locale. We just have a dollar language.
Yeah, I can't imagine there's any case where a language option could not handle a locale, because a locale always has a language associated with it.
Fine, it just has to be untangled.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now what are the questions that remain here? Okay, so let's go through again what we're saying. We're saying basically that language locale, we then know what to do. We then have these names, short, medium, long, full, for example. We have this explicit template form, or we have an association, right?
Right.
Now, in the template form, these elements here are elements that come from, where do they come from? They come from properties of date format, right?
Yeah, so they're date string elements that are all, there's a table on date string and a table in date value, which uses the same element names that basically says these are all the possible keywords.
Okay, fine. So these are the keywords. So, and it's a bit unfortunate that there's no, okay, so probably we should support verbatim as an option in that templating mechanism, just in case you want to write weak as a
if you want
word
to use
there.
the literal string. Yeah.
Okay. Sander is commenting on date string. Is there a date convert function? I can't even remember. There's a time convert, but there's no date convert.
Like calendar convert or?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, you know, Wednesday, the 3rd of January, 6 p.m., whatever, written out. I guess that just corresponds to a canonical internal date. And then there's another, yeah, so it's pure formatting because the internal representation is invariant under, you know, the different possible choices of what you give as input. Okay, what else do we have to figure out here?
I think there is a global question here about whether to roll out these for the moment only for dates or more general. So for example, this local data function, it's mostly dedicated to date information at the moment.
Well, wait. Local data is yet a different thing here. So this is...
Right. So we need a function that reports information about the various locales.
Why aren't those just properties of the local entity?
They could potentially be. There's some specific things like, you know, this date short form, etc., where we basically want to have a mechanism to look up the association that you'd give to date format.
Fine.
That
Beautiful.
Isn't in alpha.
That's a terrific computed property for that entity.
Okay.
I don't think we should have local data. It looks like it's really just an entity property story. There should be just properties of the language locale entities. Make sense?
Yes.
Maybe an advantage of this is that it will look up to the library, to the local library.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly have.
Alpha. And another thing is that you can invent locales. I mean, for example, you can combine English in Peru, which doesn't exist because we don't have any variants, but this will automatically fall back to the general English, to American English, right? Because someone could put that as an input for example, in your browser. You can write exactly English underscore Peru, for example. And that's not supported in
I don't understand.
This will be more flexible.
Okay. Then it's not local data. Then what you're specifying is a local object of some kind. That would be the alternative. What you're proposing is something where there's some kind of, you know, just like molecules, for example, are not all entities. You're saying that it will be some kind of local object that you could request properties of. Am I making sense?
Right, because a locale is basically a collection of potentially up to 4 parameters for the language, the location, the script, and a variant potentially.
Sander is suggesting that some kind of mechanism for date string where you can give a string and then you give its input language association arrow its output language association.
Yeah, I mean, we'd basically be able to do that in from date string. There's a date format option that exists for anything that generates date objects. So you could say, you know, the second argument of from date string is the input, or the parameters associated with the input string, and the date format option is the output.
Or alternatively, we might want to support, like in word translation, something which is literally a
arrow to arrow.
Yeah. Does not seem unreasonable. Okay, but I understand the remaining issue is you want to be able to do a local lookup on the entity property object. right? That was your main point, Francisco. Yes, that was the point you were making.
Right, but also the fact that yes, and also the fact that you can let's say create locale specification because they
I
are
understand, but we already dealt with that in talking about
potentially independent
having.
parameters. Yes.
Okay, I understand, but so, I mean, it seems to me that the way we should think about this is by having a locale open close, so to speak. I'm not sure. Right. I don't think this is right. I think what we want is the specification of a locale, not locale data. This doesn't do us any good, right? Unless what you imagine is that locale data returns an association which you then feed to other things. The alternative is a symbolically specified locale that will be turned into, yeah, I'm not sure. I have to go to do another live stream actually. And I need to go. So maybe you guys can do one more iteration on this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I mean, I think we have enough to start working on the dates part of this, and then sort out: do we want locale
Fine.
as a first class object, or do we want to use entities?
okay, sounds good. Okay, for those watching these live streams, I am signed up to do a Q&A about business and innovation. And then at the top of the hour after that, we are coming back to, let me see, what is it today? Language completeness and consistency meeting. So thanks everybody for this meeting.